There we are. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, good morning, whenever you happen to be watching this, or even good afternoon. I am Ian Simmons, and I'm here with Earth's Mightiest Critics. We're doing our Spotlight India series. We're getting it in just towards the end of the month. I promise we're going to do one of these every month and just making it under the wire. And this time, we're talking about a very different kind of film than we have talked about in past iterations. I'm going to hopefully not butcher this title. The American title, or I guess the English title, is An Off-Day Game, but the original title is OZHIVUDIVASATHE Kali. We'll
Wow.
see.
Well
Yeah.
done.
Wow. Better than I could do.
That's assuming I pronounced any of that correctly. It might have been smooth, but it could also be incorrect.
It could be.
But so here with me tonight to talk about this film and some other things are we've got Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck from Special Mark Productions in the spoiler room. Yes, that's you, Mark.
That's me.
We have Mike Crowley of You'll Probably Agree, and we have Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. Welcome back, Jeff. It was weird. I know you popped into the green room before we went on, and we were talking about Movie Pass, and I don't think anyone actually said, "Hey, Jeff, how you doing?" So, hey, Jeff, how you doing?
That's okay. Great to be here. Nice to see you all. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I know you can see me. It's a little dark in the room. I'm not sure why that is. It seemed pretty lit when I was getting set up, but here I am. Adds a little more mystery to my presence, I guess, maybe.
And also, it also reflects the darkness of the film that we're going to talk about tonight.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And maybe it's a touch of Theater of Blood, Ian, which I'm so sad that you didn't invite me for this last week, because that's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. But
Well, way to go, Ian. Way to go, Ian.
I'm a bad person and a worse friend. I'm sorry.
I can quote that movie, and we'll quote it at lunch sometime.
All right. So before we get started, I do need to talk about some recent news. As the reason we are doing this Spotlight India series is because I don't know if there was an echo. Sorry,
that was me. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I had the YouTube shareable link open and I was sharing.
Oh, no worries. But the reason we started this series is because of a little movie that came out last year called RRR by S.S. Rajamouli, which I will never stop talking about, and which is my favorite film of last year and of probably the last several years. There was some controversy in the fall because they were talking about Academy Award nominations and for International Picture. And the different countries are putting up their films they were going to submit. And India, or the Cinematic Governing Board, I don't have their name here. That's an embarrassment. In their infinite wisdom, they decided not to put up RRR, even though it was breaking all sorts of records and a very popular movie phenomenon. They put up a film called Last Film Show, as it's a coming of age drama. And they submitted that, and then when the announcements, the actual nominations came out last week, Last Film Show is not anywhere to be found. RRR got a nomination for Best Song for Not To, which is great. It's an achievement. It's going to bring recognition to the film that it might not otherwise have. But I am just, I don't know, I'm burnt up about RRR not getting even considered. I think it deserved to be up among, even forgetting the international thing. What does it have that Top Gun Maverick doesn't have? Now, that would be the one I'd swap out probably. However, I do also understand that Top Gun Maverick was an important film last year, broke all kinds of records, and as they say, brought people back to the cinemas in a major way. So I just wanted to stop and acknowledge that RRR is a great film, and it's the reason we're really sitting here talking today about Indian cinema, because it really opened me up to the possibilities of other movies that are coming out of this region, and learning about Bollywood and Tollywood and the the different mythologies and politics coming out of the culture that I was frankly unaware of. It's been a fascinating journey, and we're going to continue that here tonight. Does anyone else have anything to say about RRR's snubbing at the Oscars?
I wonder if it got snubbed. Oh, Jeff, you can go.
No, go ahead, Mike, please.
Well, I wonder if it got snubbed because they didn't consider it like real or serious cinema. Then
those people did not watch it.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. I think they didn't watch it. I think they saw All Quiet on the Western Front And hey, I liked it a lot too, but to swap it out with RRR, it's like All Quiet is more of an easier choice to make, based on the Academy's history in their movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, have two thoughts on it. One is countries screw up all the time about the movies that they submit for best film. Pedro Almodovar is the most popular Spanish filmmaker, and yet his country continually does not submit his films for the best foreign language film. And the year that he won his second Academy Award for Talk to Her, they did not submit that film for best foreign language film, and it would have easily won. I mean, my God, it was a foreign language screenplay and one of the original screenplay that year. They've done that many times. He was not submitted for Pain and Glory, which would have easily been probably the winner that year with the Antonio Banderas Best Actor nomination. So shame on India for this, although, maybe at the time they thought, well, this is the right move for whatever calculations. It is funny, though, the Academy is always, like great and kind of terrible at the same time. They nominate a lot of great work and things that the critics like and audiences this year liked. I mean, it's kind of amazing that Top Gun and Avatar are both up for best film, knowing that they're big hits, more so than, well, Top Gun was a critical hit, Avatar was a decent critical hit, but I mean, they usually don't nominate the big money makers, and there's a number of other ones that have done well that they've acknowledged across the board. But then the whole controversy around Andrea Riseborough's nomination, which seems to have been inspired by an actress calling a lot of her actress friends and sort of getting them on the bandwagon, which is not much different than the paid ads that they have in Variety and Hollywood Reporter. But a lot of people who were thinking that a couple other actresses were locks were not, because somehow that last minute sort of push got Riseborough in there, or the fact that RRR did not make it. It was a popular hit, it was a critical hit. To your point, Mike, there was very little buzz or very little hype about All Quiet on the Western Front. It's well done as it is, and it started to figure in some critics' awards and 10 best lists, but it was hardly given the push that Netflix has pushed a number of other films like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and some of those that definitely benefited from having sort of the big push money-wise and everything behind it. I mean, I think it's unusual the Triangle of Sadness got up there, and it also was a Best Director nomination. I would argue that that's the one that may somehow have taken RR from it, because it's a, the sort of odd entry, the eccentric one, the kind of unusual one. I mean, it's a dark comedy that usually those kind of things do not get acknowledged by the Oscars. So you never can figure it. There's always something that's confounding. Nobody really was predicting Riseborough. A lot of people weren't expecting All Quiet to do quite as well as it did across the board, tying for the most nominations with, I think, 11 that Everything Everywhere All at Once got. So hard to say, but yeah, it's a shame about RRR. I think it will win Best Song, so it may be going away that night an Oscar winner. But a lot of people expected that to be up for film and director, if not editing and cinematography, and a whole batch of awards, and to get nominated. But then my favorite foreign film of the year, Close, got nominated for only Best Film. And then my second favorite foreign film of the year, Decision to Leave, got completely shut out. A lot of people thought that was maybe even going to get a director nod. So you never know with the Academy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing, and I am personally biased because I love RRR, but I just think about the phenomenon of that movie. It's a big hit on Netflix. That's how a lot of people heard about it and saw it.
Sure.
But also, SS Rajamouli and some of the folks associated with the film, they made, I think, a couple of trips over here to the States to promote the movie. They were famously at the Music Box
That's right.
in Chicago. And just being at the Music Box, it reflected a lot of the stories I had heard about some of those other, screenings like in Hollywood and other places, sold out screenings where people were just going nuts. Yeah. I mean, it was not like Rocky Horror Picture Show participation, because like half the audience, I think, in those screenings had never seen the film before. They had just been told by their friends, you got to come see this on the big screen. Right. And they're, stomping and screaming and cheering, and just, it is, as Scorsese might say, cinema. And just to see that, I don't know. It's that shutout, except for song. I mean, Rajamouli's going to the Oscars along with the, some of the other folks from the film. That's wonderful. Right. James Cameron, I think, had said in a tweet or something, because he met Rajamouli, or Rajamouli met him, and there was like a gush fest a couple of weeks ago, and Cameron had said, "Look, if you want to make something stateside, we should talk." I think that would be phenomenal. So
there's the victory right there, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
really
getting more of an audience worldwide, or at least in the States, where it's a big deal.
But I mean, he met Spielberg, I think, at some point. So he's got all these like people who are nominated for Best Director, and their movies are praising this guy for something that, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think his film mopped the floor with both of those guys' entries this year. Yeah, but you know what? Enough drowning in our sorrows. We're going to talk about a film that is drowning in its own sorrows and alcohol and all sorts of stuff.
See, and I'll just be over here because I'm a big genre fan, and the Oscars. Look, I'm just saying there have been some performances in horror films that deserve recognition, and Oscar immediately turns it away. And I think if you would mind, Ian, I didn't want to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
Really quick about RRR. I think the part of the problem is a lot of the Academy may have looked at it as a genre film more so than what it actually is. Because if you went just by the surface and don't actually pay attention to it a bit, you could see it as just a genre film of sorts, a kind of a fantasy. There's a whole other layers to it, as we've all talked about. But maybe that is also part of the reason why it was pushed versus All Quiet on the Western Front, which in all honesty, I thought was going to be a Netflix series. And I didn't even know it came out until like a week later. I heard people talking about it. I'm like, wait, that came out? And then the next thing I know, it's got like 11 Oscar noms. And I'm like, I don't even know hardly anybody outside of maybe you guys who have watched it.
You know, I have not. That's one of the movies that I got to catch up with in the next couple of weeks. Because I had it wasn't on my radar at all. But I mean, that's the thing is, like, I understand what you're saying about genre films. I mean, if I had my druthers, there'd be a place for, 2 Ty West films up there. And
at least
Mia Goth. Mia Goth. They don't even talk about Mia Goth being ignored. I mean, they talked about the locks of Viola Davis and Detweiler, but I mean, Ana de Armas getting there is a little bit surprising, considering a lot of people felt the film was not great and was kind of polarizing, but she was terrific in it. So they I think recognized her achievement and in some degree her bravery for taking on such a challenging role. But poor Mia Goth, she's great in 2 horror movies, and she doesn't get acknowledged. But to Mark's point, they very rarely acknowledge horror. I mean, the amount of horror that's been nominated has been very, very rare, and only in the history of the Academy is one film that, yes, it is a horror movie, albeit a very intellectual sort of elevated horror movie, has won, and that's Silence of the Lambs. But I also think what helped that is that it was a prestige film that wasn't done by horror people. It was done by A-list actors, a director who is not known for horror at all in Jonathan Demme, and same with The Exorcist, but that didn't win that year in '73, despite that being the biggest film critically and the biggest commercial hit that year. It lost to The Sting, which is a terrific movie, but it was just too much for a lot of, I think, the members to sort of completely accept, and part of that is because I think they think that horror is a little bit of a B genre, which really up until movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist generally was. It was not an A-list thing, so the Academy thinks they always have to go for the most noble stuff, and somehow they still don't see horror as fitting into that, even though it's come so far. And movies like Goth, like with Mia Goth starred in, are incredible performances that should have been in the short list and weren't even talked about as real contenders because it's from that genre.
I mean, I feel like you stitch X and then Pearl together in that order, even though Pearl came first chronologically. I think part of the magic of that is the reveal of that flashback of that farm. But you stitch those movies together into one like 3-hour thing, and I think you nudge Avatar right off the damn map. But yeah, okay, let's move
nudge
on,
that off.
Well,
the map.
and it's interesting. Let me just say one last thing, Ian, about it. It's interesting too, because I was a fan of Blonde, because I think it is about the bill of goods that women are sold and they try to attain in Hollywood, and how it's working against them, and they aren't given really the fair shot. And the funny thing is, I think that Pearl is exactly the same story in its kind of way, at least as far as the message of the film, as Blonde is. But Ana de Armas gets in. I'm glad she did. But poor Mia Goth, who I thought should have gotten in for probably that one as well, didn't really stand much of a chance. It's too bad.
the last thing I'll say, and Mark, don't apologize, because I think this is a great,
for
kind
sure.
of tag to the conversation. Mia Goth is, I have not seen Infinity Pool. I know a lot of people are kind of losing their minds over it. Um, one day we
I
shall
haven't
see it,
seen
Mark.
either.
But she is, I mean, she's been on my radar since she was in the Lars Van Trier movies,
Nymphomaniac.
Nymphomaniac.
That's right.
Yeah, and that was a decade ago or
Yep.
so. So I think she's going places, and I think her strength, what she exhibited specifically in Pearl, is the ability to, I hate using this phrase, but to elevate the genre.
Yes.
I think if she continues to do this strong work, then there are going to be people who are not going to be able to ignore the films that she's in and the work she's doing in those films for much longer. It's wishful thinking, I know, but that's the kind of thing that I think could be a real revolution in horror, and I'm excited for it. I'm also excited. Okay, Mark. Last word.
Okay, no, I'll just say, bring it around. I will just say, in 10 years, more people will still be watching RRR versus All Quiet on the Western Front. So, regardless of the Oscars, RRR is going to be talked about and watched far more than All Quiet on the Western Front in years to come.
I sincerely hope that's true, and I can't wait to see what SS Rajamouli does next. All right, so let's talk about An Off Day Game. I'm not going to pronounce that title again, but it is a, Mark, you messaged me on Facebook. I think you would watch this late last night.
Yes.
And you said you didn't tell me it was a slow burn film, and I think I messaged back like I had no idea until I started watching it, because this was recommended by a viewer on our last show. You should really check out this movie. So, we did it. We found it. Sorry, we found it on YouTube.
You can't find it anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's literally nowhere else. Not even on disc, on streaming. I looked everywhere. This was the only place, at least in the West, you can find it.
Well, so yeah, it was a pretty decent, transfer, I guess. My only, gripe, and I guess we'll get right into it, is in the opening title card. They've got a cool kind of scrolling title card of the movie, or the title, An Off Day Game. But then there's like not a parable, but there's some kind of a story on this paper, but it's all written in a language I cannot read. But they had white subtitles against a white, essentially, piece of paper that was scrolling by, so I couldn't even tell what that that story or that parable was. So I may have missed some context, but that's not going to be the first time that I utter that phrase in this conversation, because as I was talking to Mike before we went on, this was, they make reference later in the film to the emergency in 1976. And I got a little bit of an idea of what they were talking about, during the context of the movie. But when I looked it up afterwards on Wikipedia, so, take that with a grain of salt, but just getting some overview of the history, this, political tension, this essentially Indira Gandhi imposing, basically taking control of the Indian government, freezing democracy. A lot of people got jailed, and there was, for it was like 2 decades, I think, this went on. It was it was not pretty, and those political tensions, those kind of like old rivalries and old tensions, I guess, come bubbling up in this story about 5 guys excuse me, who get together for a drinking party retreat in the woods on following election day. Pardon me, I take a sip of coffee. But this tension, the talk of caste systems, the treatment of women, the treatment of men on men, it's low-key explosive. That's the only way I can describe this. There's probably, like, out of this hour and 44-minute movie, maybe 20 minutes of so-called action of things going on. But the build-up to the finale, one of the closing shots, it's so chilling. I wouldn't change a thing about this movie. I really do want to watch it again, knowing now what I know more about the context surrounding the story. I think it'll be even more powerful. But for as long and patient of a film as this is, I think it really does have a lot to say. And I'm glad we're talking about it. It's much different than RRR. It's much different than Sardar Udham. It's much different than Undundun, which was like this, crazy like adventure action comedy we talked about last month. So yeah, let's get into it. who wants to go, I guess, second, because I'm done rambling. Mike, I nominate you.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Mike. Please go ahead, Mike.
I'll see what I can salvage from this, because this movie had a lot to say where I think you kind of have to be familiar with the politics behind it. What I got was, it was sort of a statement against masculinity in a way, because there was like one exchange where one character is talking to another character about how do you dominate a woman, and he said you have to be on top of her, and then the other character says to him, well, you're just talking about rape, and isn't that what you do with your wife? And I was like, what? And from there, you kind of get an idea, okay, these aren't just like regular people like out on some retreat. These are probably, or the main guy is like the one who sort of like runs the government or just got elected or something. And you kind of see how their behavior is reflective of that government's behavior. And it's something where I think with a little more background knowledge, I would understand and appreciate more, but it sparks curiosity. And for that, it did have my attention, especially like with the second half, because the first half, everything is shot on a very static camera. It doesn't move a lot. And then later they use a steady cam and they're going around the room and kind of engrossing you more in this environment and drawing you closer into the characters as they kind of show their true colors a little more.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about this is and again, this is coming from a completely different cultural perspective, but this getaway, this place is out in the middle of this very thick woods. I think there's a brilliant kind of establishing tracking shot as they're going over and through these trees. You just realize how isolated they are. But it's the kind of place that, when I think of a bunch of like my friends getting away, yeah, we're going to go to a house or a cabin or something. It's still a pretty nice, modern building. This place had really, there was watermarks all over the walls. There's this really strange sink in the middle of the room that had a backsplash of just like random tiles, but the rest was just plaster walls. It wasn't very luxurious, and yet it just seemed like these men of somewhat means were just going out there to drink and piss around. Maybe that was sort of the idea. They were just going out there as a place to indulge alcohol and not for the finer things. But there were a couple of people who were, I guess, responsible for keeping up the facility and cooking them dinner and kind of seeing to their every need. And they're treated like absolute garbage. There's the one guy who they purposely get, blackout drunk, which I guess is kind of fortunate for him because he missed all of the calamities that happened at the end of the movie. And then you have Geeta, who is the lady who is making them dinner and who gets sexually harassed and constantly leered at. And not knowing where this movie was going, I thought that this was going to be a weird I spit on your grave type of situation. And it didn't end up that way, but it was in a different way just as horrific with what happened at the confrontation at the end. So yeah, Jeff, what did you make of this film?
Well, I think you guys are both on to all of the things that I think become apparent as you watch the film, and not only the themes of it, but sort of the subtle way that it builds up. I will say this: I think it is a little confounding the more, in some respects, for us as film critics, or the more movies and TV shows you watch, because it has a crudeness and a primitiveness to its filming that there's. I mean, I don't think there was a close up on a character until 40 minutes into the film. And some of the shots are just woefully static. To Mike's point, they sit there, or we're watching action through the trees and we never punch in on anything. So it almost seems amateurish, but what I think the filmmaker was trying to do, Sasidharan, I guess his last name is Sanal Kumar Sasidharan. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I think he is doing something that's interesting that you bring up, I spit on your grave, and that is, I think he wants it to feel very much like it's really happening. So there's very little editing, very little interference with the camera observing it. In fact, it could be somebody watching it from a distance, maybe almost, sort of a fly on the wall, or kind of, a person who shouldn't be there watching it. And slowly but surely, it starts to kind of fall into place. And I think everything in this film, actually, believe it or not, as much as I was kind of confounded by this, and I wanted some goddamn close-ups, it's like, can we get some coverage here? I mean, is this film school here? Get the coverage. Where's the reaction shots? I mean, they spend all this time on the female character. We never get a decent look at her. Her butt gets more close-ups than her face does, which is, she becomes sort of a symbol rather than a character. In some respects, that's what the film is trying to show us, because that's the point of view of the men towards her. But what I think that's interesting about the film is the more it builds up, you start to see where it's going and it falls into place. These are not good men, even despite the fact that they have station. They are supposedly the bureaucrats and people who have wealth and social standing, and yet they're all crude, they're all rude, they're all sexist, and they're all kind of vile. I mean, how many times do we see them wrapping and rewrapping themselves in towels and scratching and all this, and they treat the help terribly? And you're right, they're not living in some lap of luxury. It's like, no, these people are still sort of gross and primitive. Their surroundings don't matter to them, because for them, all they want to do is get blind drunk and maybe diddle the lady and have that kind of stuff. Even her cooking, she's out on the terrace and it looks like some sort of bad campfire that was a makeshift thing, as opposed to, these are men who could afford to bring in a stove or go someplace that maybe has a stove. I mean, it just had this kind of primitive look to it. And I think arguably the whole thing is about the look of the film, the actions of the film, the setting of this film is about this sort of ugliness, because the more that it reveals about all the characters, by the time they get to their game, something terrible is going to happen because it's ugly. And they've already talked about their one friend who they discriminate against, because even though he's Indian, even though he's one of their peers, even though he's in their circle, he's darker than they are. So they discriminate against him. They call him a black, where the other guys are white, which is extraordinary. And that's, I think, the thing that maybe for the audience out there, to get sort of a look beyond some of the crudeness of and the sort of naivete would seem to in the making of this film, they would be able to understand that, because that translates from caste system to society to decade to century. And at the end, there is such a blasé attitude about this horrific thing that they've done. It's like, does that seem that much different from what we just saw this last week in Memphis? Not at all. In fact, I kept thinking of that while I was watching. It's like, you can say this was in 2015. And it's about films from the past, but those problems still exist. They existed 200 years ago. And wherever there's a system of those who have and those who haven't, those who are the servants, those who are the rich, those who are whatever up the food chain of a caste system, similar things kind of happen. And that's what I thought was kind of, at the end of the day, somewhat brilliant about this, even though it's a very hard film to like, because it's a slow build and it's kind of sort of almost ridiculous in how it's not much of a film in a lot of respects, or at least the traditional ways we would expect to see.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. One
Sorry,
thing I wanted,
you mean to go on so much?
No, it's good, because there's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about, which, at first glance you wouldn't think there was, because again, not a lot, quote unquote, happens in this movie.
Right.
I do want to talk about the filmmaking. That initial shot where they're kind of sitting around talking about making plans, just after the big election day kind of parade, and everyone's making their way through the crowd, and they get out to this clearing in the woods, and they're talking about going out to this rental house or whatever. You're right. That scene, I was frustrated by it, but I was also, I kind of marveled at it, because I don't know if it goes on for 5 minutes or 8 minutes, but we're sitting there a while with this static camera, and there's people coming and going and making plans and all that, but it's one continuous shot.
Right.
And that plays into what I think is the naturalism of this film, despite when it gets sort of heated and there's, the story kind of kicks in. I didn't feel like anybody in this movie was acting. I felt like I was watching something that could actually happen. And I began to wonder if maybe that is why we didn't get a lot of close-ups. We're sort of peering around corners. At one point, when we go upstairs to follow one character who has had enough and he wants to leave because of this argument, we're literally, the camera is at like head height. So it's like we're coming around the corner and then standing back as if we're the sixth person in that room. And I wonder if that's because the director or the writer, this is based on a short story, wanted to like literally say these group of people are representative of people you might know or people you might think you know. We're just going to watch them. They, can you put yourself in that situation? If you got close-ups, you're like, oh yeah, I know that person or I know that actor, but if that sort of remove is like, oh, there's that guy's got a mustache, that guy doesn't, that guy's a little bit darker skin, that guy's not. It's a lot easier to just kind of go with generic people. These are big problems we're talking about. It's more of a political kind of allegory than a story about. It's not The Hangover, although it does kind of have a Hangover style vibe, but it's more like Very Bad Things, I guess, than The Hangover. But Mark, what did you make of the movie? I want to get you in here. I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. I watch a lot of indie film. I probably watch a lot of indie film, and this felt like it at first. It surprised me because I was reading about how it got awards and it got acknowledged and everything. And I'm like, first that I'm watching it, but as it went on, I think what you guys are hitting it on the head. What they want to do with this is not present an actual like movie narrative. The impression I got from it, and again, I'm unfortunately not familiar enough with the culture, so this is just from an outside perspective, but watching enough movies, what I think they were trying to do is give you the feel of pulling back the veil of going, look, this is how society is still. Because I get the impression, especially at the beginning, when we get just the static shot of them making plans, everybody's kind of buddy. They're kind of on the surface. They're like, all friendly to one another, even though they're different political parties. They're chiding the one political guy, for his votes, but, oh, hey, we're all going to gather for drinking. And then once they get the alcohol, aka truth serum, we start to see true colors come through. But the way they shoot it is all very documentary type style, as if these are, like you said, they are real people. And I also get the feeling, and maybe it's just because of the translation, I also get the feeling that some of it was improv, because we get more and more long tracking shots, which I love. Long tracking shots, people don't realize the emotional impact long tracking shots have, because until you see them, because we get so many cut 30 40 cuts within a minute of some films, and here you're getting long tracking shots. And if you look at it from the filmmaking perspective, these actors have to continue to act during that long tracking shot, namely when the one guy was going to leave and they talk him back. That is one continuous tracking shot from when he starts to leave out into the driveway. While they're there, a guy comes back in. They're going, what's going on? They're bantering.
And it's raining.
It's
raining.
It's legit raining. That's not a rain machine. It's legit raining.
Right.
And you keep following them. It doesn't cut away. You keep following them back up the stairs, back to the table, and then eventually it kind of cuts to the alternate angle. But if you think about what went into that and the conversation in that, not all of that could have been scripted. It had to have been kind of also improv'd a bit, because it's all one shot. There is no coverage. But by doing that, you do get this window of life. You get this feeling, and the way they direct it, you immediately know what the guy, you feel for the who's it? Geetha is her name? Or,
yes.
You immediately feel for Geetha. Like, she's starting to cook and she has her partner there who they're trying to set up and everything. And he kind of talks to her a little bit. You're like, okay, but it doesn't take long for them to direct it to go, she's in danger. I mean, from when the political guy, even the guy who has the station, is staring down at her at the balcony, you're like, okay, you need to leave. You should just leave. You get that feeling.
Yeah.
And then Anna, or the one guy who is the most boisterous, he really starts to get creepy. And thank God she had the meat cleaver with her. But the way they all set it up, it really felt like they were trying to make a statement in reality, like saying, I'm not presenting you a fictional account. Here's how things still are, even at the time this film was made. And that's maybe why it was the impact, because it felt like there were conversations and stuff as well in here that you feel like these are real conversations. This isn't someone writing the script going, oh, this is all kinds of woke, I'm going to make these guys, you know what I'm saying? This is, I think, what he was going for. And that's why I'm sitting there going, I've got patience. And then you get to the last 20 minutes as things ramp up. And by the end, you're just like, wow, I starting this film, I did not expect it to end where it did and me to feel the way I did by the end of it, considering we were getting shots of babbling brooks and rocks like long form, short, slow burn films love to do.
Well, it seemed like it was tranquil almost at first, it was deceivingly so, like, oh, we're out in nature. But see, that's to me the comment too, like he's playing with people's nature, and by letting the scenes go on and not become subjective, like the director's decided what he wants us to see and when. By that, like that long scene where the guy's trying to leave in the rain, we see it go from like, oh, kind of cajoling and we're sorry, and come back to threatening and like, are they going to beat him up? Are they going to hurt him? Are they going to like resent him for wanting to still leave, so they're going to hurt him? Or it's this slow dread, and we're experiencing it in real time and sort of seeing how this becomes these out of control men, influenced by alcohol, influenced by their station, and sort of unchecked by any real balances or law around them out in the wilderness.
Well, it's something that I didn't pick up on. And again, this might come back to culture, and I don't want to offend anybody by what I'm about to say, but in, I guess, America, I can only speak from my perspective. We're a melting pot of different races and cultures. We have a lot of issues over skin color here. That guy's white, that guy's black. It's sort of that guy's Asian, that guy's Mexican, whatever.
Right.
That lends itself to its own kind of problems. When I'm watching this movie, I'm just seeing a bunch of Indian friends out for a weekend. It wasn't until Dasan starts making this speech towards the end about how he's considered black, almost the black sheep of the group, and everyone else is sort of considered white. That hadn't occurred to me. But then I started thinking back after what happened to him happens, and I was thinking, okay, he's the one that they sent out to kill the rooster. He's the one that went up the tree to get the jackfruit. He's essentially playing this almost subservient role, which, if you rewind the tape in your head, it makes sense that these kinds of things would explode in this way. It kind of comes out semi-coherent, which makes sense because they're all, blind drunk. But yeah, the movie is deceptively thematic, even in those moments like, how long is he going to be up in that tree? I mean,
But to your point too, Ian, there it is again. I mean, he is placed in the role of servant, where they are like telling him what to do. Well, but he just falls into that, and they kind of go along with it. And again, there's the caste system. It's the ruling class and then the people who serve the ruling class. And that's how it's always been in every probably culture since the dawn of time. It may seem subtle, but we do it here in our own country. I mean, even with people who are servants, how many times do you go to a restaurant and your friends don't look at the waiters because, well, they're the waiters. I mean, that's right there. That person could be Billy Joe Bob or whatever sitting there, and make $30,000 a year. And yet he's sneering at the guy waiting on him at the subway because that guy is below me. We do it all the time. And they do that here in this movie. It's very interesting. And they don't seem that different from each other. But in that culture, those are significant differences.
Well, it's interesting because you bring that up. And again, this might just be BS, artsy fartsy theorizing, but when Dasan goes out to strangle this chicken because nobody wants to kill this rooster for dinner, it's sort of a last minute like, hey, we're going to have rooster for dinner, and they want Geetha to do it, but she refuses. No one else wants to touch it, so Dasan kind of goes out and he strings it up. I've never seen a chicken killed like this before. Usually it's you cut the head off or whatever, but actually strangles it. The scene where after this happens, the camera kind of floats away, and then we get some more of these babbling brooks, but then we get to see a medium shot of the rooster hanging from the tree. At first I thought it was just sort of inartfully done because it's such a flat shot that the body of the rooster, there's no definition separating it from the forest background. It's almost like a Where's Waldo thing. I'm looking right at it, but I can't see it. And that I feel like maybe that is some kind of a commentary on Dasan's struggle, his identity within that group. Like, it's something that is really bothering him. No one else really seems to care because they see him just as part of the group, but they don't seem to identify with like, oh, he probably doesn't even care about any of that stuff. Yeah, we'll just go send him to do our dirty work. He doesn't mind. He's Dasan.
Or he seems less of a living person, just like that
Yes.
chicken was living, and now just blends into the rest of the background. They don't even see it as something that had a life, and they've decided to dispose of it in a horrible way. It's also a wonderful moment of foreshadowing, of course.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
because he ends up exactly the same way at the end. Now, there's like, again, I'm going to use the phrase low key to describe some of this movie. There's like a low key tension in that balcony scene where they play the game. They essentially draw lots to play, was it governor, cop, thief, and there's some other role.
That's the game. That's the
Yeah,
actual.
that's right.
Right.
Any minister,
Yeah, thief,
You get thief, cop,
minister, king. King is the
king,
rich
yeah.
man.
Mhm.
And then one that they add, which is sort of done a little heavy-handedly
Supreme
here, where he's
Court,
the
right.
Supreme Court. He's kind of the judge of it, who, of course, right off the bat, he declares himself the Supreme Court without being elected. And he's the first person assigned a role when they're playing the game. And then, of course, he's bribed the entire game. So he's not making any really informed judicial decisions. He's just basically saying, I'm the guy you have to bribe if you want to win the game or not be the bad guy in the game.
Right. So the cop has to find out who the thief is out of the
Right.
various people who've drawn these lots, and he essentially chooses wrong every time until he
Yes.
gets to the last guy. And I can't remember the name, but it's the dude who was got slapped the crap out of by Gita when he made an unwanted advance. He's leaning against that railing, and I thought for sure this Hitchcockian tension of like the unexploded briefcase.
Yeah.
I thought he was going over that railing, and that was going to be a whole thing. Like, how do we deal with this?
Right.
But no, and that was, I think, a deliberate piece of misdirection. There's a bunch of that in this film. I think it was really well done because it's Dasan who ends up going over. He doesn't go over the railing. They tie sheets around his neck, and they put him over that. And he's hung. That's one of the closing shots of the film, is him hanging there horrifically as the camera like goes back, through the apartment and down around the stairs and around the front, and like boom, there you see him. Now he is definitely separated from the background. There's no mistaking that there's a dead body hanging horrifically there from the balcony.
Yeah, and it's stylistically made where you're almost like desensitized, like these guys, like we were talking about earlier. Like the camera's always held back. It just seems like a bunch of people having a regular day out. And when they're about to hang Dasan was his name. Yeah, when they're about to hang Dasan, the way he's reacting when they're pinning him to the ground and everything, you think, oh, they're just playing, but he's acting horrified. And it's not until the end that you see the body, but the camera still takes a while to go around for you to kind of like ingest like what happened. Because like after he hung, I was like, wait a minute, is he really dead? Or what? How high was that balcony? Or what am I watching? And of course, once they turn it around, it's kind of like how you don't think about how people in power don't think about the harm that they're causing or
That's
care
right.
about it. And until you turn around and look at it, then it sort of sinks in. And I think that might have been what they were going with it, but it's open for interpretation, which is what makes it more fun. It makes the viewer more the participant.
Well, it's interesting too. It's the one flourish, if I dare say, the director puts it, and that's it's almost like a Brian De Palma camera move, like something from Dress to Kill when he's weaving the camera all around the art gallery as Angie Dickinson is pursuing or being pursued by the gentleman who's also in the museum. And suddenly it was almost like he was sort of saying, see, I can make this look like a movie with sort of a flourish like that if you want to, because it's a hell of a reveal in the end shot. It's very Hitchcockian as well, which is of course also sort of the De Palma shtick. But you're right. Up until then, I think we're kind of lulled into almost thinking that we're watching something that is almost like a documentary. It's casual. It's these people sort of interacting. It's maybe making some bad comments about men and power, and obviously they're sexist and they're kind of cowardly to not want to actually have to make their dinner. They get the guy who's in the caste system who they deem the guy who should do it. And then suddenly at the end, it becomes lots of symbolism, lots of commentary and point of view of the director, and then even a very, very stylistic shot that lets us know that this is much more deliberate than maybe we at first thought. And I think that's kind of the power of it, is that we're kind of lulled into it, just like these guys, seemingly, like you said, a sixth member of it. And then we see all this stuff that we don't really go along with in life, but we're part of it. We're there with them and watching this. And then we sort of feel sullied at the end because we've watched this all happen and maybe missed the foreshadowing and the signs that this was a group of terrible men.
Well, and that's one of the things I liked about this movie is it definitely has a point of view, but I don't think it hits your description of it, Jeff. I think is much more, and it's not a knock on you, it's much more heavy-handed than I think the film presents itself as.
Yeah, I grant you.
But
yeah,
but
I'm sort of saying it almost like if I was doing an essay on it, sort of, here's what I think it meant, but it's never that obvious.
Right. And that's what I think is the brilliance of it, is a lot of this stuff comes out in snippets of drunken conversation.
Right.
There's no soapboxing where people get up and they make these grand protestations and stuff like that.
Right.
It's people kind of lashing out under the aid of alcohol, and we're meant to fill in the gaps, even when they talk about the emergency and things like that. It strays into politics, but it doesn't become like a giant debate movie. The result of that conversation is, I think, evidenced by the film's final moments. It says something that we don't really know much about these men, or at least it's hard for me to pick up just on first viewing. I think, was it Mark or was it Mike? What do you guys said that, these may have all been kind of powerful people? I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I feel like it feels like a mixture of, like, maybe these were childhood friends who grew up in different to become different types of people in different casts, and their friendship kind of bound them together. Because my question is, Dasan, he's been murdered. You can't just cover that up or walk away, yet the film walks away from it. There's no talk of the aftermath or consequences. It's almost a comment. I don't know if it's a commentary on, like, well, that the rich can get away with murder or whatever. Maybe that's the case, but there is no sort of judgment by the filmmakers. It's just like we see Dasan's body and then everyone else just kind of magically disappears, which I think was kind of a bold statement. Usually you watch these kinds of movies, like I mentioned, like The Hangover or Very Bad Things. Those are kind of wacky / dark comedies, but there's the bro retreats where there's like tears and crying and I love you, man, but people fight and then they kind of resolve their issues and we kind of walk away knowing how to feel about everybody. I don't know how to feel about everybody because I don't exactly know where everyone's from. They are, I think, bad people to a degree, but not all of them are as bad as everybody else. Like there's the one guy, Turumeni, who's the dude in the glasses who kind of disappears for a while because he's out kind of getting provisions and he comes back with more booze. He's also the Supreme Court justice. He's complicit in the entire thing, but he's also one of those sort of background characters. And everyone else is like screaming at each other. He's just sort of like, what are you doing? Is this a drink? So he's complicit, but he's not evidently as much of a bastard as some of these other guys are. And I think that's also an interesting choice on the part of the filmmakers too, talking perhaps about the fence sitter, the people who are just like, yeah, everyone's got their own points of view, and I'm just going to sit here and not really get involved until my hands get bloody just because I perhaps didn't get involved or didn't take it seriously.
Well, I actually think you're onto a point there, Ian. I think that it is not necessarily saying that these people are pure evil. They aren't, but they are bad men, and they quickly devolve into bad men. Their treatment of women, their excess of booze. They seem to be, unwilling to accept that one guy wants to leave, and they bully him into staying. None of that's good behavior. So these people may be good family men. They may be, good in their jobs. Who knows? But it's kind of funny with this given circumstances out in the wild, sort of unchecked, not really under any of sort of the constraints of what might be society or traffic or 100 other things. They sort of go too far with a number of things. And it seems to me there was always a little bit of tension about, is this on the verge of becoming dangerous. I think alcohol, especially drunk to excess with men in a group settings, the mob is never good, and alcohol is never good in those situations. And an attractive woman who's the only woman among 7 men there, or 6 men, is not good. But yeah, I think it just shows how quickly it can spiral out of control. I think before that final act, you're worried about, are they going to attack this woman? Are they going to attack their friend who wants to leave? Are they going to get into a fight? Who gets to be the cop or who's winning the game? Because they seem to be starting to get very pushy and loud and aggressive and asinine about it. And I think, like I said, they're probably decent people in many respects, but given those set of circumstances, they default into really sort of base, almost primitive versions of masculinity and humanity, and lose it.
It's almost like Lord of the Flies, except there's
I was
a woman
just
involved.
gonna say that.
Very good, very good.
I was just gonna say it. It's like a Lord of the Flies with adult men.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I'm going to cut that part of the show, Mark. That could be misconstrued.
Well,
no,
no, that's a different one. That's Lord of the Flies, but flies is kept. Never mind.
Oh no.
Anyway, that's a different
Lord of the
movie.
Flies unzipped.
They didn't have to change the title for the
right. They
version.
did have to change the title for parody. It's just a different box art. Anyway,
but nice choice of words there, Mark.
But that box art was something.
Yeah, it was.
I'm just saying.
Well, but
what
go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
I was just gonna say, one person that I think we mentioned who is out of the way, but who I fully think died of alcohol poisoning. Was the guy in the chair. And I think it's kind of implied that there's something more than him just being passed out drunk.
That they might have drugged him.
Well,
to get him out of the way.
Either they may have either drugged him, or he just had too much and he passed out, or one of them accidentally killed him. I don't know, because he's in that chair. He doesn't move for half the film, even passed out drunk. I mean, and it goes along with what we were saying at the end of the film. The rest don't acknowledge him because of his station, basically. The only reason they're acknowledging Geetha, unfortunately, at least some of them, is because she's female. Otherwise, if she was a guy, they would barely acknowledge him. That's the impression. But the one guy, they're, oh yeah, no, he's one of us, till he gets passed out drunk, and then he just leave him in the chair, and I think he died, in all honesty.
But to your point, Mark, they don't care about him after that point.
Right.
He's out of the picture, so they've stopped even thinking of him as a human being. They think of the Geetha as a just sort of this object and a sexual object at that. And the guy is just a servant. And when he stops serving and is passed out drunk, they don't acknowledge him. And when they get down to it, the person who is the least of the sort of assigned roles, which interestingly enough kind of matches sort of their assigned roles, the rich man, the bureaucrat, they're playing the same people that they are in real life. And then of course the person who just 20 minutes earlier said, you guys look at me differently because I'm darker skinned and I'm always discriminated against because of that. He's the man that's expendable. And it's also interesting too, because I think this is how these things happen and they escalate, and you don't see them necessarily going that way. But do you think those 5 cops, when they stopped Mr. Nichols at the traffic thing, thought that it was going to end the way it did? I mean, maybe they thought.
Well, that's we don't need to get into that whole thing.
Well, no, I'm just saying. But I think what it is, it's about groups of people in situations that get out of control quickly can really, really escalate fast. And I think just the point of, is that I think that same thing is going on here at the movie and the story in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about, I believe that character was Narayanan. When we first see him and Geetha, they're getting the sort of the I keep wanting to call it a hotel, the house, whatever they're staying in, ready, and he's like kind of berating her, like, this isn't cleaned up yet, this isn't, you haven't put the food on yet. He seems like he really wants to please them, to the point where he's hanging out and they're saying, yeah, have another drink, and he's eventually passes out. I think he's just gets blackout drunk and is sort of out of the way. I don't know if there's anything more nefarious, because I don't think they would waste their good drugs on one of the house servants. But it's the thing about Geetha is why I think that's a bit of keen misdirection, either on the part of the director or the marketing team, because the sort of the poster, the iconic image of this film is her with the close up of that that threshing tool or whatever, and then the photo of the 5 guys kind of in the woods, and that's one of the reasons I thought this is going to be a nice spit on your grave kind of situation, like things get out of hand or the accused. But she exits the picture relatively quickly. I think she's out by about maybe just after the midway part. She decides that she's gonna go home, and the one guy follows her and he tries to put the moves on her, and she slaps the crap out of him. And I'd never heard this phrase before. He calls her daughter of a bitch, and then she says motherfucker. I'm like, and then she just keeps walking. I'm like, that's incredible. The movie could just end right now, and I would be so happy because I wasn't expecting it to go that way. It's for as much as we are afraid for Gita in this movie, I think there are cues that even if these guys had the gumption to actually do something, I don't think they would have the stones to do it. The guy, he takes the slap. He doesn't, we've seen that in other movies where, the girl slaps the attacker, and, things escalate terribly from there, but he just kind of takes it and slinks back to his bros. The other thing is there's a prolonged song that these guys are singing, and it's the only context I can think of it, or the only parallel, is sort of rap music in the way that they talk about, women. But this sounds like a very kind of popular song that they all know. And some of the lyrics are, let's marry another woman. One of our wives, once our wives are beaten well. Yeah. And I think that's like, once our wives are beaten well, like that's like the chorus, and they keep repeating it, but it just feels kind of like talk. I don't necessarily feel like these guys are going home and beating their wives, despite some of that other conversation about like, is sex rape and all of that business. It just sounds like, I feel like these guys go home and they are not necessarily the rulers of the roost in the way that they perhaps like to think they are when they're on their little guy retreat.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the way they talk about women in general is pretty horrific. And yeah, once you get to the end, I kind of wonder, are more people going to die at the end of that thing? Because they took that game very seriously in a way. Or seriously is...
Well,
are you saying this could be like the next Saw franchise? Like, hey, I want to play a game.
Well, I would be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting in the story and the craft that and it's subtle, and I'm as shallow as a puddle, and I make puddles into lakes, so pardon me, but the trigger is that incident with Geetha, because literally right after we get that, we start the discussion between the 2 guys about the sex with women and being dominant. And if you notice from that point, which, something finally happens. Yeah. Me and slow cinema usually don't quite get along too well. But from that point, that is like the pin in the grenade. Up until that point, you kind of had the atmosphere of something's going to happen. There's tension, but it kind of subsided quick when he tries to grope and do the thing he did with Geetha, and she fights him off. I wanted her to cut his arm off or something. She had to. I'm like, yeah, get him. I'm like, yeah, go. But from like literally that moment to the rest of the film, the pin has been pulled, and you just see things, the pressure build, like it starts to escalate, just shoots right up to where that atmosphere is no longer atmosphere. That is the environment they're in. And what's even more telling is when they're doing the game, if you look at the look on who is it, Dasan's face, he's the robber. He got the robber paper instantly, because the look on his face the entire time, if looks could kill, they'd all be dead. Because he's just looking and he's just waiting. And it's almost like he knows, and the other guy knows, who's making the guess, the cop, that he's the robber, and that he's making the mistake choices on purpose to leave him to last. And that's almost the impression I get, is that he knew who the robber was, and he left his buddy and he may have been wrong. He may not have known completely, but he left Dasan last on purpose, regardless of his last guess?
It's entirely possible. I mean, it's something that I hadn't really put together until you had said it, Mark, was after the incident with Geeta, the one dude goes back, and that's when I believe that's right around the conversation of the emergency comes up. He
Right.
goes in, sits down, starts poking the bear of that conversation, because the one guy was like, yeah, it was great for, some people. I mean, you got this cushy government job. You don't even live here. I guess he was implying that the guy was visiting from like Britain or something, because he's like, or I don't know if it was Britain, but he's like, I'm ruled by a king. But essentially the guy was like, yeah, it was, sure, everyone was made to go to work on time, and that was wonderful for them. But my father was a political prisoner, and when he came back from, his time, he was a different man, because the guards had plucked all of his, facial hairs out one by one, and tortured him in unspeakable ways. And then one guy's like, well, that's kind of a personal problem, something you got to deal with. What does it have to do with anything we're talking about? Like, wow, these guys are friends, huh? But I think we're just about time here. So do we have any final thoughts on an off day game, the sunniest, cheeriest movie of 2015?
I think it's interesting because we sort of use the term slow burn, and I think that is, but I think maybe in some respects a better word for it is festering. I think it's almost a festering horror film. It feels very much like I Spit on Your Grave, both in that sort of pseudo documentary feel, that kind of lulling you into thinking that it's just going to happen. There's very little music in that movie, and it just suddenly explodes. And I think here, there's this kind of recipe that's slowly but surely falling into place. And some of it has to do with rejection by the woman. Some of it has to do with them trying to one up each other in the way guys do when they get together. A lot of it is alcohol. But by the time they have been rejected by the woman and she's left and they don't have any help really, and they're kind of left to their own devices, and they pull the bureaucrat in the rain, which is ridiculous that they're all standing there arguing for 10 minutes and stuff. It's kind of a festering, almost a horror film waiting for this horrific ending. And there's some power in that, because it's like, I didn't expect it to go there. And at first I thought it seemed like it was almost amateurish made, but I think it was done that way to make us feel like this is just this thing happening. And then suddenly, boom, something really amazing and terrible happens. But it's kind of earned because we see it festering. There's very few cuts in this. I think I read in the promotion material or something that I read that there's only like 70 or 80 cuts in this whole film. So it's clearly made very inexpensively. And there's some shots, to your point, Mike, that go on for like 6 or 7 minutes and I think you said that too, Mark. There's a point in the middle where there's a couple shots that, the camera doesn't move. We're watching that path down the way as they're trying to get their friend back in the rain to go on, and it's just sitting there for 7 minutes. So we're kind of lulled into it, but it's this festering awfulness that comes out at the end, and it's kind of a shocker.
I think that should be on the poster. An off day game, festering awfulness.
There you go. If they want to put my quote on there, I'm all for it.
All right, Mark or Mike, any closing thoughts?
Well, it depends the mood you're in to see this film. If you're if you want to see a movie that's slower moving and actually builds up to something and doesn't just not go anywhere, because that's always my main fear whenever I see a slow moving film. I'm like, okay, is this going to actually lead to something? And it does. It's a movie that could be seen and seen again and probably reinterpreted in 50 different ways.
Right.
And that really plays to the strength of its narrative and its direction. And it's not just something you can see and be like, oh, all right, I got it, and then walk away from.
Yeah. Mark, how about you?
I think the film has even more power for the region that it was made in. I mean, we're all looking at this from a perspective to where we're not that, we're not in that culture every day, so we're not familiar. But if it gives you any thought of how strong this film is, and you've heard this discussion over the hour, this is what we've picked up on just from us watching it from basically an outside perspective. So you can imagine those who are closer to the material, closer to the subject matter that they talk about, probably felt when this film came out. And you can see why it actually got the accolades and talk about that it did in India, according to all the information I've been found. I would recommend this if people like found footage films. Watch this film, because it's what I would call almost a hybrid film of found footage, to where it's not found footage, but it's shot almost like a found footage film, as if you're one of the people there with your camera, either on your phone or on your shoulder. However, you're watching it, and it's the events are meant to feel realistic. And so it really has a spirit of a found footage film, even up through the end. You know, in a way, it's someone with the camera, just being one of the people, not necessarily a filmmaker, just a person is watching this. And I think that's what they're trying to go for. This isn't, you're not seeing this through a cinematographer's lens. You're not seeing this through a director's lens. I think in the end of the day, it's a film that is meant to give you a feeling like you're just a person watching this. This is just a person watching this. That's the POV. And if you're a found footage fan, though, I would say, you definitely would probably really enjoy this film.
Yeah, to that point, Mark, I mean, you could almost cut this, like just add a quick insert piece. The establishing kind of group shot that we talked about that goes on for several minutes, and then making the plans to go to the house. We're off behind some, foliage, watching them from a distance. And then later we see, as I mentioned, we're almost in the room, kind of rounding corners with them standing back. It's almost like this is body cam footage of people who are on a sting to to catch these guys in the act. Like they played this game before.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just like hyperbole, but it's not much of a stretch to say you could work that into the narrative somehow. But I thank you guys for talking about this movie. Again, it was recommended by a viewer. I'm glad that they recommended this. It's a different film than what we've talked about before, and it's deceptively complex for what it is. We've talked for over an hour about a movie in which guys go out to the woods and drink, and then one of them ends up getting killed because of a stupid childhood game. But there's so much more to it than that, and I think it's wonderful. So I would just like to say thank you, everyone, for watching this. Thanks for going on this Spotlight India journey and continuing on with us. We'll be back next month talking about something. I do want to mention, have you guys seen, Mark, I know you've seen the trailer because I think you sent it to me, for this movie called PATHAAN. Have you heard of this yet?
I sent you the trailer on purpose because when I saw it, I'm like, oh, this is yeah.
It looks like Brosnan era Bond mixed with RRR on cocaine.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'm going to link the trailer below. Yeah,
it's one of the Indian action films. Which, if you've ever through the time even seen the trailers or clips on YouTube from Indian action films, they get insane. And when I saw this trailer, I'm like, I gotta find this movie somewhere. I gotta see it.
That's funny.
The thing is, it is playing in Chicagoland, and it's even playing in some like random suburbs out here. Like I looked it up when Mark sent me the trailer. I'm like, it's playing everywhere out here. So I'm thinking, if it expands somehow next month, we might have to talk about PATHAAN. Or Mark, I might just have to pay you like $900 in gas money so you can find a theater near it to go. When I say $900 in gas money, I mean so you can drive like 10 miles.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll talk about something next month. Maybe PATHAAN, maybe something else. If you've got a movie that you'd like us to watch and talk about, I mean, we've got a whole spreadsheet of recommendations going back to the RRR days. But yeah, leave a comment below. Also, leave a comment if you've watched an off-day game and you find our interpretations to be wildly off base. Perhaps you are, part of the culture that this movie is reflective of, and you're like, you guys don't get it at all. We would love to be educated. We're not saying any of this to be offensive. It is just our interpretation as film critics and and Westerners. We love the film and we appreciate what we think it's trying to say. But if you've got an alternate interpretation or something that might enhance our understanding of it and agree with us, please leave a comment down below and be sure and like and subscribe and all that stuff, especially to my fine and lovely guests. We've got, again, Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck, we've got Mike Crowley, we've got Jeff York. All their information is below, including the rest of Earth's Mightiest Critics who couldn't be here tonight. Yeah, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much. Take care. And yeah, go Indian cinema. I love this. I love this all.